If you want to understand the exact mechanics of global economics, you really don't need a 1,000-page textbook.
Right, and you definitely don't need an MBA.
Exactly. You honestly only need 57 words.
Which, I mean, it sounds almost ridiculous to say.
It does. But for today's deep dive, our source material isn't some massive academic white paper or a historical text. We're looking at a highly specific, targeted linguistic framework.
Basically a vocabulary list.
Yeah, literally a vocabulary list. It's categorized under business, economics, and globalization. And it's titled, How Globalization is Changing Modern Business.
And, it sounds reductive, right, to say that you can just map the entire global economy with a vocabulary list.
Right.
But the reality is that the language we adopt, it dictates the systems we are capable of building. I mean, corporations don't just invent words in a vacuum.
No, they use the words they actually need to function.
Yeah, exactly. They prioritize vocabulary that reflects their operational reality. So by isolating these specific 57 verbs, nouns, and adjectives, we're basically looking at the source code.
The linguistic DNA of modern global economics.
That's a great way to put it. We can deconstruct the exact mindset and the practical mechanics of how a modern multinational actually works.
Because when you look at these words laid out all together, it strips away all the PR spin.
Oh, totally. The marketing fluff is gone.
And if we're mapping the life cycle of a global business, the absolute first thing they have to deal with is, well, the raw mathematics of resources, the gathering phase.
Which is inherently a math problem, yeah.
So let's look at the foundational language here. We see terms focused on gathering, like accumulate, aggregate, and allocate.
Right.
Then there are words of pure measurement, like bulk, portion, proportion, and ratio.
Mm-hmm.
And finally, words dictating timing, acting prior to an event or deciding when to commence.
And notice the progression in that specific set of verbs. I mean, a company doesn't just go out and buy things.
Right. It's not a grocery run.
Exactly. They accumulate raw assets, they aggregate them into usable formats, and then they allocate them. That is a highly calculated chain of events.
Okay, let's unpack this, though, because there's a massive contradiction sitting right in the middle of this specific list.
Oh, I know exactly which word you're going to bring up.
Yeah, it's the word finite.
Yep, there it is.
I mean, surrounded by all these words about gathering in bulk and accumulating, doesn't finite contradict the whole fundamental premise of modern business?
How do you mean?
Well, we're always told that global corporations operate on this mandate of infinite growth. So why is finite sitting right there in their core vocabulary?
Well, they operate on a desire for infinite growth, but their internal language proves they're, fully aware of their physical limits.
Ah, so the math brings them back to reality.
Exactly. That is the core tension of all economics. Yes, businesses have this mandate to scale, to expand across borders, and to produce in bulk to drive down costs. But finite is the physical wall they eventually hit. I mean, there's only so much lithium for batteries, right?
Right, or a finite amount of container space on cargo ships.
Exactly. Or even just a finite number of skilled engineers in any given market.
So the infinite growth narrative is just for the shareholders, while the actual operators on the ground are sweating over the word finite.
That's pretty much it. Or rather, I should say it's the very reason those mathematical words exist in the first place.
What do you mean?
If resources were truly infinite, a company could just blindly accumulate. They wouldn't need to do the math.
Oh, I see. They wouldn't need a ratio.
Right. But because capital and materials are strictly finite, they have to aggregate what they can secure and then ruthlessly allocate a very specific portion based on a highly engineered ratio.
And this high-stakes math has to be locked in prior to any expansion.
Exactly. Before they ever commence a new global project, they are balancing that ratio. The vocabulary reveals that a global enterprise isn't this engine of endless taking.
It's an engine of hyper-efficient distribution of limited means.
Exactly.
But once those limited means are allocated, they don't just sit in a warehouse.
Yeah, they have to move.
Right. And crossing borders introduces an entirely new layer of chaos, which pushes us into the next phase of our linguistic framework, the mechanics of movement. We're talking about navigating a world in motion.
And geography is never static.
Definitely not. The framework shifts here to words like immigrate, migrate, and overseas.
Yeah.
And we also see the word fluctuate.
Fluctuate is a big one.
Yeah. And then there are words of timing and order. Occur, sequence, proceed, forthcoming, and coincide. Here's where it gets really interesting to me.
Okay.
When I hear words like immigrate or migrate, my mind immediately goes to human beings, people moving across borders.
Naturally.
But when you pair migrate with overseas and fluctuate in a purely economic context, It paints a picture of this living, breathing ecosystem.
So are global businesses just reacting to this massive, chaotic movement, or are they the ones actually causing it? I would argue they're trapped in a feedback loop of both. I mean, globalization is fundamentally defined by the constant, unceasing flow of capital, goods, and talent. All three.
All migrating at the same time.
Right. When cheap manufacturing or favorable tax incentives suddenly appear, capital doesn't just gently move, it migrates overseas.
It rushes over there.
Exactly. And when entire supply chains migrate, local and global markets inherently fluctuate.
But a fluctuation is just a wave, right? You can't command a wave to stop.
No, you absolutely can't, which is why the subsequent verbs in this section are so telling. You've got occur, sequence, proceed, forthcoming, and coincide.
Right.
Those aren't words of dominance. They are words of orchestration and timing. A truly successful global business doesn't try to force a market.
They anticipate forthcoming shifts.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They wait for regulatory and economic variables to coincide, and only when those variables perfectly align do they proceed with a specific sequence of actions.
So the language is almost kinetic. It's acknowledging that the global market is a moving target.
It's entirely kinetic. I mean, if you try to rigidly force an outcome while the underlying capital is fluctuating, you'll just snap. The system breaks.
Wow.
The vocabulary proves that global operators view the world as fluid. They're orchestrating a sequence, not building a static monument.
But if you're dealing with finite resources
Yeah.
and you're trying to hit this moving, fluctuating target overseas,
Yeah.
that level of fluidity requires an immense amount of control.
Oh, absolutely. Which brings us to the next toolkit in our linguistic DNA.
Right, the active strategies. To survive all that constant fluctuation, a business has to deploy specific tactics to steer the ship. And the framework gives us words like equip, facilitate, monitor, modify, manipulate, resolve, pursue, seek, enhance, and rely.
This is the operational toolkit. This is where the rubber meets the road.
Now, I'm immediately drawn to the contrast between two specific verbs here. Facilitate on one hand and manipulate on the other.
That's a really interesting pair to single out.
It feels like the difference between greasing a wheel so it spins freely and forcing a puzzle piece into a spot where it doesn't quite fit.
Right.
Are global businesses trying to harmoniously connect the world? Or are they just aggressively trying to control it?
I think we have to detach the moral baggage from the word manipulate when we talk about these macroeconomic systems.
Fair enough. We hear it and think of deception.
Exactly. But in the context of global trade, think of it more like a mechanical engineer manipulating a complex joint.
Oh, like physically adjusting the machinery.
Yes. To survive, a company must equip itself with the data required to monitor a massive global footprint. But monitoring is passive, right?
You're just watching.
And when a geopolitical crisis suddenly blocks a major trade route, they don't just sit back and watch it happen.
They have to modify their logistics.
Exactly. They manipulate their supply lines to resolve the friction. They get their hands dirty in the mechanics of the system.
I see. So manipulate is just the hands-on mechanical intervention required when a system fails.
Yes. Sometimes the best strategy is to facilitate, to build infrastructure, smooth out customs processes, make the flow of goods easier for everyone. You facilitate harmony.
But when things get competitive.
Right. When you're competing for market share, you seek out new demographics and pursue aggressive growth to enhance your standing. You manipulate the variables you can control so you can build a system you can ultimately rely on.
That distinction makes a lot of sense. You facilitate the flow, but you manipulate the machinery when you have to.
Exactly.
But that idea of machinery leads directly into the next phase of this list.
Yeah.
Because if you're manipulating supply chains across all these different overseas borders, the underlying architecture of your business has to be universally adaptable.
Modularity is basically the only way to scale globally.
So let's look at the words dictating this architecture. We have component, compatible, equivalent, domain, aspect, attribute, mechanism, and occupy.
It's very mechanical language.
It is. And compatible and equivalent jump out immediately. Is globalization basically just the metaphorical equivalent of making sure a power plug from one country works in an electrical outlet in another?
I love that analogy. The power plug analogy is a great starting point, but it doesn't quite go deep enough.
How so?
Well, it isn't just about making sure the plug physically fits the wall. It's ensuring the entire electrical grid is operating on a voltage that is equivalent. So the machine itself doesn't just catch fire when you turn it on.
Ah, Right, it's the whole system behind the
Well,
wall.
exactly. When a multi-billion-dollar enterprise expands into a new domain, say, they're moving operations from Tokyo to Berlin. Every single aspect of their operation and every attribute of their corporate culture has to be broken down into standard components.
Because you can't just copy and paste a corporate headquarters. The labor laws in Germany are entirely different from the labor laws in Japan.
Precisely. So the company has to engineer an underlying mechanism. The software they use to track inventory in one domain must be fully compatible with the server architecture in another.
And the human resources policies have to deliver an equivalent outcome, even if the local regulations require a completely different legal approach.
Yes, they're stripping the whole business down to these modular components so they can seamlessly occupy multiple geographic spaces at exactly the same time.
And if the parts aren't compatible,
Then, the friction of operating across borders will eventually tear the company apart. It's that simple.
wow. It's systemization on an almost terrifying scale,
Yeah.
taking all the unique, messy complexities of a local culture and basically forcing them into a standardized, compatible component.
It is massive.
And that brings us to the final phase of the framework, the end game. We've gathered the finite resources, we've navigated the fluctuating overseas movement, we've manipulated our supply chains, and we've standardized every component.
Yeah.
What is the actual goal here?
Well, the bottom line, the actual outcomes of all this crazy orchestration.
Right. Let's look at the final set of words. Impact, outcome, margin, revenue, retain, mature, eventual, invest, offset, predominant, prospect, ongoing, and exceed.
That is quite the list.
It is. And we see the classic financial buzzwords here, margin and revenue. But when you pair those standard concepts with terms like retain, ongoing, and eventual, it kind of completely changes the flavor of the conversation.
It really does.
It sounds less like a high-speed, get-rich-quick tech sprint
Right.
and more like a grueling, decades-long marathon.
Because it fundamentally is a marathon. What this vocabulary reveals is that true massive-scale globalization is never about a single isolated transaction. The barrier to entry is simply way too high for that.
You can't just dabble in global trade.
No, absolutely not. To successfully standardize your components across multiple domains, a global enterprise has to make an enormous initial investment. They are pouring capital into infrastructure just to offset the inherent risks of playing on a worldwide stage.
So they aren't looking for a quick quarterly bump. They're trying to establish a predominant market position. They want to be the default choice globally.
Right, and to achieve that predominant status, they really have to abandon the idea of immediate gratification. They're building ongoing, highly mature systems.
Yeah.
They know that expanding into a new region might not yield profits for 5, maybe even 10 years. But they endure that massive burn rate to secure eventual positive outcomes and systemic impacts.
So placing the word eventual next to revenue isn't an accident.
Not at all.
It's an acknowledgement of the massive sunk cost.
It adds the dimension of time to the dimension of money. Their entire strategy is designed to exceed their past financial prospects, while simultaneously fighting to retain their revenue and margins against fierce international competition.
And retaining a margin internationally sounds exhausting.
It is. When you view margin not as a static number on a spreadsheet, but as this fragile state you must constantly fight to retain over an ongoing timeline, you start to realize how precarious global business actually is.
It completely recontextualizes the whole thing. The sheer endurance required to keep that mechanism running is staggering.
And that is the true value of deconstructing this specific 57-word framework. It basically acts as an operational manual for surviving the modern economy.
It really is an entirely different lens. And as we pull back from this deep dive, it's pretty remarkable how much the underlying narrative shifted just by analyzing the vocabulary.
Yeah, it takes you past the surface level.
Exactly. I mean, we started with the harsh math of reality aggregating and allocating resources against the unbreakable wall of what is finite.
Right.
And then we watched capital and supply chains migrate, forcing companies to wait for shifting overseas variables to coincide before they could even proceed.
We saw how they deploy a toolkit to manipulate and resolve friction, breaking their operations down into compatible components so they can occupy new domains.
And finally, we arrived at the end game, deploying mature, ongoing strategies to offset risk and secure eventual revenue and predominant impact. It's literally the complete life cycle of international trade, just hiding in plain sight within a simple vocabulary list.
And, the reason this exercise matters for you, the listener, is that the vocabulary you consume shapes your structural understanding of the economy.
Absolutely.
Whether you're analyzing market trends, prepping for a boardroom strategy session, or just trying to parse the actual meaning behind an evening news segment on international trade, recognizing these specific action words changes how you process the information.
It gives you a decoder ring.
Exactly. When a multinational CEO issues a press release, they aren't using filler words. They are utilizing this exact linguistic framework. And once you recognize the words, you stop hearing generic corporate buzzwords and you start seeing the strategic gears turning.
You see the mechanics behind the statement. When they say they are, quote, modifying a mechanism to ensure ongoing equivalent outcomes, unquote, you know exactly the kind of border friction they are secretly fighting behind the scenes.
You see the reality instead of the projection.
But as we wrap up today's deep dive, I want to leave you with one final lingering question to ponder on your own.
Okay, lay it on us.
We just spent this entire deep dive proving how these 57 words perfectly map the current state of human-driven globalization, right? The manual orchestration, the physical overseas migration, the intricate allocation of finite physical resources.
The current paradigm.
But if this is the language of today, what entirely new vocabulary words will we have to invent to describe business in the next 10 years?
Oh, wow.
As artificial intelligence and total systemic automation begin to completely rewrite the rules of global trade, what will the new 57 words be?
That is a fascinating prospect. The entire foundation of that vocabulary is going to completely shift.
It's definitely something to keep an ear out for the next time you hear a company talk about their forthcoming mechanisms. Until next time, keep diving deep.